Hey guys, with the recent release of Dragon Quest III HD Remake, I have been eager to touch on some of the old mysteries from the trilogy. You see, the new game is pretty faithful to the original, but it does include little things here and there that connect to other games and concepts in the series. Concepts that weren't really established at the time of the original trilogy. Now of course, over the years, the first 3 games have been remade on the Super Famicom, Game Boy Color, and mobile devices. But this one really takes it a step further. Its gorgeous visuals and retelling of the original story while adhering to the old turn-based combat system are all excellent. Still, there are some things here and there that perhaps the casual player may have missed. Some that go back to the 90s when the game was originally released. And it's those story details and concepts I find most interesting. Now kick back and relax while I go over some of the more interesting concepts and questions from this game. Here are 7 Dragon Quest III Remake mysteries. Number 1. Did Dragon Quest XI happen? Let's start by tackling something big at the very start of the game. When the hero is sleeping, his mother and grandfather are downstairs discussing the situation. She puts her book on the shelf, states it's time to wake him, and heads upstairs. What does this have to do with Dragon Quest XI, you might wonder? Well, if you completed Act 3 of that game, you would know that the extra ending depicts this exact scene. Let's touch on that really quick though. In Act 3 of that game, there are a lot of time travel shenanigans. I won't go into the deeper story aspects, but what is important is that at the very end, they reveal that fundamental changes to reality have been made, and that the game itself now exists seemingly as a story in these books. You might even call them echoes of a forgotten age. The implication is that Dragon Quest XI is either the ancient past of the world of Dragon Quest III, or a world that got overwritten with the current one, and now only exists as stories. Regardless of that, the extra ending clearly depicts the start of Dragon Quest III. It was a little unclear back when 11 first came out, but there is no doubt about it now. It really is amazing how much effort they put into this too. It is accurately reproduced here at the start of the game. I can't see the textures in the book, but the color of these 2 books matches that of the video. When she comes upstairs, the hallway, the room, the walls, the sconces, even the door design, it's all the same. The size is a little off. The hero's room too is basically the same, right down to the bed design and bag on the wall. Even this plant in the foreground can be seen further down the hall. Because of how Dragon Quest XI plays out, I'm a little conflicted as to say if it did or did not happen. To me, it seems more like their reality got overwritten with a new one, and memories were written down and passed along. We cannot deny that this new version of 3 has nods to 11 in it, such as the Sword of Kings now being broken, and stated to be made in the ancient past. The forging hammer too states it is ancient, and was used to make a legendary weapon. It could very well be that this hammer is the same one we saw in 11, that was used to reforge the Sword of Light. Though sadly, this time around, it is nowhere near as flashy. In addition, it's possible that Ortega and his child both have the luminary powers in them, passed down from that lineage, as they are both the hero vocation. It would fit, but the mark of the luminary is never talked about in this game. Nor is it implied that the hero or Ortega have such a distinctive mark on them. As such, it isn't clear what their power source is, or if it came from a connection to Dragon Quest XI. But what is clear is that the powers gained by the hero have a direct correlation to what we see in the Luminary of 11, even if it is only because the Luminary's powers are based on the hero class that first appeared in Dragon Quest III. Number 2. Is this world Earth? Alright, so their reality got overwritten due to time travel and went from the world of Erdrea to this new one. I'm not sure if that actually makes sense, but let's run with it. The next logical question we need to ask, and one that has been in the community since the 90s, is if this world is Earth. Looking at the map, the landmasses are reminiscent of the ones on Earth. All the continents are here, from Europe to the Americas, to Australia, and even Antarctica. They are all here. Adding to this are locations like Japan and the names of other cities that correlate to geographical locations on Earth. They also lined up the accents of the NPCs to those locations as well, further connecting things through the localization process. Given the locations of the settlements and stories that take place there, and how some of these relate to local myths in our real world, the parallels are even clearer. For example, in Northern Europe, there is a side quest dealing with a town that has been cursed by fairies. The tragic story unfolds like something you would see in an old Brothers Grimm fairy tale. Likewise, the desert town of Ibis and the Pyramid Dungeon are all located in what would be comparable to Egypt. And of course, the story of Orochi and Jipang is a clear reference to a similar myth in Japanese mythology. It is clear, indisputable really, that they are making allusions to this being Earth. The big question is if it is actually meant to be the real world, or just an approximation of Earth within the mystical setting of Dragon Quest. Kind of like, I would say, what our world might look like if it were in this universe. I mean, clearly there are no Dragon Ball Z monkeys roaming around India. Let's assume for a moment, though, that this is meant to be Earth. Well, if some 16-year-old kid scoured the globe grabbing all these crazy weapons and armor, then fell into another dimension never to be seen again, that would explain why we don't have any cool explosion-slinging swords in our world, right? Moving along. Number 3. Is there a world tree? A staple of Dragon Quest games is the inclusion of Yggdrasil, the world tree. This technically started in Dragon Quest II, where there was a single spot on the world map, a forest space, where you could search and gain a leaf of the world tree. Fundamentally, it was included as a resurrection mechanic, since that game was the first to introduce a party system. I don't think the English script for the NES game ever called it Yggdrasil by name, but as the series went on, the use of Yggdrasil became more common. In the Dragon Quest Builders games, Yggdrasil is explicitly called out in the world of Alefgard. This isn't Alefgard though. This is Earth or some approximation of it. As such, we have to ask if there is a Yggdrasil tree here. I am inclined to say yes. Throughout the world, we can find many of these leaves, and they are clearly called out as such by their name. Though sadly, the merchant dialogue doesn't indicate anything. We should note that Yggdrasil is part of Norse mythology, and yet there is no mention of the tree in that part of the world. However, there is an interesting spot in the game where you can get one of these leaves. In the center of the Asia continent, within its lush forest, there is a spot where you can search and find a Yggdrasil leaf. In the original game, this wasn't as obvious, and you had to notice these markers on the terrain and search where all four would cross. A cat in the dwarf shrine will tell you about this spot in all versions of the games too. Coming back to the question of this game has a world tree, I always got the impression from the original game that there was meant to be a huge tree in this location giving the leaf. In the remake, an extra description has been added to describe taking it from a branch as well, probably because there is a literal tree on the map. While it would have been more fitting for Yggdrasil to be in Norway somewhere, the Dragon Quest series has established that each of their worlds needs a Yggdrasil for life to flourish. And so I believe this Earth world has a tree, and that it is probably located here in the deep forest of Asia. Number 4. Where is Aliahan? Another world mystery that has lingered since the 90s is the landmass of Aliahan. Continuing with the assumption that this world is supposed to be Earth, then this landmass stands out as very odd given it would be in the center of the Pacific Ocean. For those of you who haven't looked at Google Maps lately, I can assure you there is no such continent in the center of the ocean, despite our best efforts to build one via a certain garbage patch. What I think Aliahan is actually supposed to be is far more interesting and rooted in myth. Have you ever heard of the lost continent of Mu? Undoubtedly you have heard of the story of Atlantis, a mythical land that sank beneath the waves. The concept of Mu was created at the same time, along with Lemuria. More important is that this land of Mu was said to be in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Without getting too much into it, Dr. Augustus Le Plongeon presented a theory about it. He was a British archaeologist, though I'm not sure how respected he is in that field. He studied ruins in Central America and claimed that the Maya, their ancient text and legends, spoke of a lost destroyed continent in the Pacific Ocean they came from. This was supposedly the land of Mu. The concept of Mu would be later popularized by James Churchward, who wrote a series of books about the supposed lost continent. I will link to some articles about it in the description if you want to take that deep dive for yourself. But coming back to Dragon Quest, the question is if Aliahan is meant to represent such a mythical landmass. It certainly would fit, given that this version of Earth plays so heavily into concepts of myth and legend. It's clear Aliahan has its own history, and I wish we had more details about it. I find it particularly telling that the Traveler Door Room has skulls pointed at anybody who comes through the gateway. Personally, I like the idea of Aliahan being this lost continent. It does beg the question, though. If it is supposed to be Mu, and this is supposed to be Earth, did some catastrophe happen to the land that made it sink after the hero ended up trapped in Alefgard? Sadly, I don't think we will ever know. Number 5. Where is the volcano? Let's talk about Ortega and his journey a little. We know he traveled around the world looking for a way to face Baramos, and that he made friends and companions along the way who helped him from time to time. When he headed off to face Baramos, he headed into the heart of Africa, an area the game calls Necrogond. There, he fought atop a volcano and ultimately fell into it. This scene has been expanded on over the different versions of the game. The original North American version, Dragon Warrior 3, added a cinematic of this fight. The Super Famicom Remake years later made an even better version of it. I have to say, both of them are pretty cool. In the new remake, they spruced it up again and added a new boss battle for the young hero to take on. Anyhow, the set piece of the battle is pretty big. During the game, after a rather epic battle, you throw the mountain cleaver into the volcano, and its eruption makes a land bridge. My question is, which mountain is this supposed to be in the real world? Well, to my surprise, I actually figured it out. Originally, I thought it was going to be Mount Kilimanjaro, the tallest mountain in Africa. However, that seemed a bit too south for the location of this mountain, which was placed here up north, closer to the Red Sea and Middle East. Looking at this area, in Ethiopia specifically, I found a far better candidate, Mount Ras Dashen. It is the highest peak in the region. It gets more interesting though, because Ras Dashen isn't actually a volcano. You see, after doing some digging, I found an old academic paper from 1935 by Erik Nilsson titled Traces of Ancient Changes of Climate in East Africa. I'll link to it below, though it requires a paid subscription to JSTOR to access. The important part of this paper is speculation about Ras Dashen, where Erik Nilsson states that it is actually the eastern peak of the rim of an enormous volcano, and that the northern half was cut down about 1,000 meters by numerous ravines, draining its magma into the Takazi River. Now, doesn't that sound familiar? A massive volcano whose violent eruption caused magma to drain into a nearby river. The side of the mountain being cleaved open, one might say? Could it be that the site of this major battle in Dragon Quest III takes place at this enormous volcano Mr. Nilsson spoke of in his paper? It certainly seems to be the case now, doesn't it? Number 6. Is the post-game canon. Starting with the first remake of the game, the one on the Super Famicom, a post-game section was added. After defeating Zoma and being awarded the title of hero, you could return to the Dragon Queen's castle and ascend to the heavens, entering the Cloud Gate Citadel. At the top of that tower, you can face off against a bonus boss, the mighty dragon god Zenlon, and once you defeat him, he will grant you wishes. One of those wishes is to bring Ortega back to life, which, of course, results in the main character's mother being overjoyed. One might question if this is meant to be the same location we see in Dragon Quest IV, V, and VI. But I'm asking a much bigger question today, which is if any of this is actually happening. Let's address the end of the game. When Zoma is defeated, the barrier between the two worlds closes. Traveling around a now peaceful Alefgard during your victory tour, There are more than a few people who suggest that you should settle down and start looking into making a family. More important is how many of these people speak as though they are stuck or trapped in this world, unable to return. Indeed, if you use your magic or wings of the Chimera, your choices of location are isolated to those in Alifgard. The ending goes on to imply that the hero and his companions are stuck in this world, resigned to a fate of living in Alifgard, and this of course leads into Dragon Quest 1 and 2, where his descendants continue to cleanse the land of evil. I want to make it clear that it really feels from the intent of the original game that the story has a pretty bittersweet ending. Sure, Zoma was defeated, Rubiss and Alifgard were saved. Many people of both that world and of Earth were saved as well. However, Ortega still met a gruesome end, and let's not forget that from the perspective of the hero's mother, her boy went off on a journey following in his father's footsteps, never to return. The hero would be trapped in Alifgard and live out the rest of his days there, preparing his descendants to look after the land. The ability to leave Alifgard and play around with a dragon deity who grants wishes is beyond the scope of what the narrative presented in the game. That is, unless... Number 7. Did the hero and Rubiss get together? Alright, I know this might sound like fanfiction, but trust me, there is evidence to support that this happened. For this, I need to speak about Dragon Quest II and a specific item you can get in it. The Orb of Restoration, or as it was translated in the original Dragon Warrior 2, the Dragon's Potion. This is a rare item that drops from liquid metal slimes, or metal babbles, as they were first called in Dragon Warrior. When used, a heavenly voice would speak to the heroes, save their game, and specify that they look over their descendants. The item drop was replaced with a magical hat in the Game Boy Color remake, but the item still exists and is functional in the game's data. It is translated simply as Save Orb, and when used, states the following. A beautiful voice echoes, "You have come so far." After telling you your experience, points needed to level, and offering to save, the voice will continue. "I will always watch over you, descendants of our loving union." When I originally got this item in the 90s on Dragon Warrior 2, I thought it was the voice of Erdrick speaking to the heroes. But after finding out about the Game Boy Color version of the item, I see now it is meant to be Rubiss. It would indeed seem that the descendants of the hero from Dragon Quest III are due to him and her having a child, and creating a lineage in Alifgard to protect her world, if such a hero was ever needed again. With this revelation, I feel this opens up the question once again if the post-game of Dragon Quest III is canon. It certainly seems feasible that Rubiss, especially since she is still crafting the world of Alifgard, could have made an opening for the hero to return home. At least for a visit, I imagine. Perhaps such a time wouldn't happen until things were set a bit more in motion. I imagine this wouldn't happen until after a child was produced, weapons and armor entrusted, and the tablet made. At the same time, I could see her permitting passage to the hero shortly after the end of the game, to fully take on the challenge of Zenlin while he is still young and at his full power. Basically, with Rubiss backing him, it certainly seems viable that he could have traveled to the Dragon's Queen Castle, ascended to the Cloud Citadel, brawled with Zenlon, and then wished his father back to life. Perhaps after spending some time with his mother and father, and wrapping up whatever business he had on Earth, then he could return to Alifgard to live out his days. Personally, I think this is a better ending. It is, however, only speculation on my part. There is one more alternative that I should mention. The post-credit scene of the new remake adds a little bit of context and teases a stronger connection to Dragon Quest II, showing the Dragon's Queen Castle where her egg remains. Her high priest swears that he will see her child grow into a fine ruler of the land, and swears this upon his name, Hargon. It would seem that even if the path to Alifgard is sealed, Hargon eventually learns a way to penetrate it, and perhaps brings with him a dragon egg or young dragon offspring. An old theory from the 90s was that her egg would become the Dragon Lord, but I didn't want to delve into that in this video. That concept deserves its own dedicated video later on, especially when we take into account concepts presented in Dragon Quest VIII, so let me know if that is something you would like to see. Well, that was 7 Dragon Quest III HD Mysteries. Please leave your thoughts on any of them in the comments below, and let me know if you would like me to do a follow-up video on the topic. I really do love the Dragon Quest games, and while they have struggled to gain popularity in the West, the fanbase it does have is really dedicated. I'd like to give an extra big shout out to my Patreon supporters who continue to stand by me. Your support means a lot to me, and I thank you for understanding how my time and energies are divided in many different directions at the moment. Thank you again for being there for me. If you guys like what I do, consider joining my supporters on Patreon or here on the channel. You'll gain access to my Discord and the freedom to speak with me about whatever you might want. It would mean a lot, and I'm happy to discuss basically any topic you might have. Thanks for watching, be safe, and I'll see you next time.